What happens when the cameras stop rolling, but the truth will not remain silent? When the perfectly posed marriage quietly disintegrates behind closed doors? When silence, once regarded as strength, is replaced by a quiet surrender? This is a tale of a hidden tape, a broken illusion, and the collapse of a reality TV empire. It's the moment sister wives became a war zone, and the microphones never really fell quiet. The cast had begun wrapping out. Shooting was completed, boom mics were stowed, lights turned off, and production trucks began leaving the cul-de-sac empty. It was finished, or at least it was supposed to have been. A small mic pinned under Kody Brown's shirt had not been seen. It was still live, still recording. What it picked up was never meant to be heard by anyone. Cody slumped into the couch as if 2 decades had landed on his back. His shirt was half untucked, his body slumping in defeat. He rubbed his temples and muttered under his breath, "This whole thing is disgusting." Robyn was motionless in the next room, arms crossed fiercely. She didn't scream. She didn't have to. "What did you just say?" Cody didn't even glance up. Living like this, the lies, the act, you, me, everyone. He spat the words as if they were bitter in his mouth. It was the moment the mask fell off. Robyn flinched, clearly shaken. She pulled back half a step as if his words had physically punched her. "So now this is my fault," she snapped back, her tone hard and clipped. Cody's voice didn't rise, but his words stung. "You control everything. You weep, then you employ audacity, and I am the one who is left to choke in it." This was not anger. This was something more frigid, fatigue coiled about harsh truth, the kind that bursts forth when the strength to deceive is exhausted. And each word was still being recorded, bare, raw, exposed. But the noise wasn't the only betrayal that came through noise. Later in the night, alone in her bedroom, believing she was by herself, Robyn grieved to a trusted producer. Unaware to her was a clandestine backup recorder, quietly sitting on a shelf close by, still rolling. Her voice had changed. The on-camera poise was lost. Her voice now trembled, not with sadness, but with fury. "He actually called me," she sobbed, before stopping herself short. Her sadness was immediately exchanged for something more bitter. Janelle's out there playing martyr, acting like she's some kind of pioneer woman. And Meri? She's some tragic Victorian ghost. This wasn't release. This was planned. This was cold. The Robyn fans used to defend had disappeared, replaced by someone resentful, someone manipulative. She paced the room, yelling about being the last one standing, the glue that held it all together, the only person Cody should have defended. "They should thank me," she snapped. "I held this circus together." She laughed out a laugh, twisted, mocking, a sound meant to conceal something rotting beneath. That tape, now known as Clip 14, Do Not Delete, somehow found its way into the hands of a retired television editor. No note, no return address, just a plain envelope and a flash drive. Intrigued, it started. Within hours, it had come to disbelief. By the next day, the entire clip had been shared on Reddit and the internet. The speculation was done. The fans were no longer dreaming. They were listening to Robyn, unbridled, tear apart the women she once called her sisters. The mask was shed. The truth was exposed, and once heard, could not be unheard. Janelle didn't need the whole clip to recognize. She had lived it. But being informed by Robyn that she was a martyr with problems, that hurt differently, because Robyn always saved those barbs for when she was sure no one was paying attention. Alone in her kitchen, rattling hands, Janelle pressed play again. And this time, she laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was liberating. Years of quiet suspicions suddenly felt like prophecy. She had seen it unravel. Cody losing his place, Robyn sliding into the middle, the rest being edged out, incrementally. Now the truth had a voice, and it was louder than ever. The cameras may have been turned off, but fate had other plans. Now the entire world knows what really happened once the lights went down and the masks came off. This wasn't another episode. This was the collapse of a legacy, captured on tape by the very instruments meant to protect it. What do you guys think? Was it fate, sabotage, or just the truth not wanting to stay buried? Leave your comments below, like subscribe to Reality Recap and that little bell icon, because this story is far from done. The destruction was inevitable. But this was not a story about lost love, or heartbreak for that matter. This was a story about control and the exact moment that facade finally shattered. Not even Robyn, Cody's so-called chosen one, was exempt from his disgust now. A phone rang across state lines. No hello, just one emotionally loaded question. Janelle didn't need to ask what it was. For the first time in years, they were on the same page. They had both surrendered, openly at times, secretly at others, but always with the prayer that this family was worth something, that their loyalty counted, that it was still worth saving. But the dream was over. Died. Christine was finished. Finished pretending. Finished apologizing. Finished sitting idle and allowing Robyn to puppet master from the background. The facade had fallen, and underneath it, they saw the truth. Robyn had never been one of them, only someone who acted long enough to obtain her authority. In Parawan, Meri looked at a printed transcript like it was a gravestone. Robyn's words weren't just mean, they were incisive, final. For years, Meri had clung to the hope that if she just stayed long enough, was faithful enough, she'd be seen again. But to be classified as a tragic Victorian ghost, that wasn't just humiliating, it was an erasure. And something inside of her shattered, not with drama, with clarity. Meri didn't need a family that erased her behind closed doors. What she needed was to walk through those doors and shut them behind her forever. No one expected the fallout to go public. But when it did, it exploded across the internet like a grenade. The leaked audio, raw, unedited, and damning, was uploaded by an anonymous source. But it did more than any TLC promo ever did. Reddit threads blew up. Instagram reels looped Cody's voice saying Robyn was ick over slow-mo clips of her crying on camera. What had been meticulously scripted reality television had become something else. Uglier, the unscripted truth. And the audience this time was not just watching, it was connecting dots, posting timestamps, flooding comment sections with a kind of outrage that was personal. The curtain was open, and no PR spin could shut it again. The boardrooms of TLC descended into chaos. Lawyers clawed over NDAs and breach of contract clauses. But the producers, they scented ratings gold. One exec complained, "We don't need a script now, this is the story." And off the record, a previous editor admitted, grudgingly, that he was the leak, under a burner pseudonym. Not for vengeance, but for relief. Years of holding in too much truth had finally corroded him. What he leaked wasn't merely audio, it was accountability. In Flagstaff, Janelle's group chat with her kids exploded, text after text, links, videos, screenshots. Even the little ones, who were usually shielded from drama, were watching it all unfold. Gabe, usually the quiet one, had only 4 words to offer. He really said it. It wasn't shock. It was evidence. Years of being pushed aside, ignored, dismissed. Now there was proof. And Janelle? She was sitting in her living room, phone in hand, while the clip was being played. She wasn't crying. She was at peace. Not because the storm had ended, but because the truth had finally been brought to light, where it always should have been. Meri read the transcript over and over again. Every sentence was like a rock on her chest. She had endured Cody's silence, his coldness, his absence of love. But to hear Robyn, the sister wife she had welcomed into her home with open arms, reduce her to a pitiful Victorian ghost that wasn't just cruel, that was strategic. Betrayal now had a voice, and it wasn't Cody's, it was Robyn's, cold, condescending, and dripping in self-righteousness. And somehow, that hurt more. With Cody, Meri had years ago accepted abandonment, but with Robyn, she had let herself hope. Hope for connection, for sisterhood, for some degree of loyalty. But she'd spent years living on the outskirts of a marriage that no longer had room for her. Her love had been met with obligation, her loyalty with silence. Still, she'd stayed, out of faith, fear, and habit. Now she knew. Robyn hadn't just survived her silence. She'd thrived on it. She'd built her throne at the top by standing on the backs of the women too exhausted to fight anymore. That had always been the game. And Meri? She'd finally stopped playing. Her fingers fluttered over her laptop keyboard, then began to type. The weight of silent years pressed upon her fingers. No producers, no editors, only her voice, raw. It trembled, but did not break. "I'm not a ghost," she whispered, but with resolve. "And I'm not desperate. I was loyal. I was lied to. And I stayed too long." She paused, her gaze drifting beyond the screen into the space where trust used to be. And in that moment, Meri chose herself, at last. "But I won't be silent anymore. You tried to erase me. But I'm here. I still exist." In that single breath, Meri reclaimed something she hadn't possessed in years. Herself. Not the wife, not the supporting actress, not the leftovers, just Meri. And if Robyn thought only Cody's confession had been taped, she was wrong. The ripple went far beyond that moment. It seeped into every whispered hallway of the family, shattering the silence that had draped their secrets. Janelle stood at her kitchen counter with her phone. Her hand shook as she pressed play. The recording didn't shock her. Not really. It was like watching a nightmare she'd already lived, now just being performed aloud. But to actually hear that venom from Robyn? Martyr complex, Robyn spat. So independent, but she can't even get Cody to text her back. Janelle didn't flinch. She laughed, a swift, bitter laugh, not in humor, but in relief. Because now the lie had been dragged out into the open. Finally. For years, she'd been the calm one, the sane one, the steady wife who absorbed the craziness, held everything together, asked for nothing, and caused even less. She did not beg for attention. She did not play victim. She kept the pieces together while Robyn queen behind the scenes. Tears on camera, manipulation off camera. Sculpting herself into Cody's emotional center and relegating the others to the margins. But the curtain was down now. The fantasy dissolved. Christine's call came through. "Did you hear it?" she asked, voice tight, bracing. "I heard every word," Janelle whispered. And they didn't need to say anything more. The instruction manual, the spinning, the fake sisterhood, all of it came tumbling down by Robyn's own lips. And Janelle? She didn't feel destroyed. She felt free. It was as if somebody had finally cut the last fraying thread that tied her to the lie. "It was never about love," she said quietly. "It was always about control. And now? Even he can't stand her. No fury, just perspective." For the first time, she wasn't analyzing Cody's mood swings. She wasn't wondering if he remembered she was alive. She was watching the tower crumble from the outside, not buried beneath the rubble. And that changed everything. Because the second you stop justifying your own bad treatment, you stop being a character in someone else's story. You start writing your own. And in that moment, Janelle picked up the pen. Back in Parawan, Meri stared out the window of her quiet B&B. A folded transcript lay beside a half-empty cup of tea. The words typed there meant more than anything Cody had ever said to her face. Tragic Victorian ghost. It wasn't just cruel. It was an attempt to erase her. Meri had heard hurtful things before, from Cody, from critics, even from the voice in her own head during restless nights. But to hear it from Robyn, the one she had once fought for, stood up for, believed in, that hurt worse. Her breath stopped, not from grief, but something stronger. Beneath the grief was a steady burn, not anger, not drama, just restrained rage. Meri had been pushed aside for years, used when it was convenient, endured when it was necessary, but never really seen. And still she came. She smiled. She played nice. She even convinced herself Robyn cared, that Robyn saw her as a sister. But now she knew. She was never a sister. She was a substitute, a fill-in, someone to keep, until she wasn't needed anymore. This time, when Meri opened her laptop, it wasn't for a business update or a polished promo. It was raw, it was personal, and it was hers. "I'm not a ghost," she wrote, voice calm and certain. "And I'm done pretending. No drama, no tears, no flashy goodbye. Just the truth." And that was more than enough. Because the deepest wound wasn't in what Robyn had done. It was in the fact that Meri had hoped, that her decades of loyalty would be rewarded, that being present, decade after decade, would count in the end. But the dream was done now, and in its place was something stronger, not bitterness, not revenge, but resolve. Meri wasn't going to fade into the background. Not this time. And Janelle? Her boots hit the pavement with resolve. No script, no spotlight, no crew, just her. A balled-up transcript in her pocket, and a fire in her eyes. She wasn't walking into a battle, she was walking into truth. Because while Robyn had accused her of having a martyr complex, what Robyn never understands is this: martyrs don't break, they rise. After everything Janelle had been through, raising children almost single-handedly, enduring years of emotional abandonment, and staying faithful to a family who always put her last, she was now being mocked by the woman who had benefited most from her silence. The door opened. Robyn stood there, arms folded, eyes red and distant. But Janelle didn't see grief. She saw self-pity, and she'd seen enough of that to last a lifetime. She stepped inside without hesitation. Meri followed. Steady, quiet. They didn't speak until they were seated at the old wooden table, the same table that once groaned under holiday meals and silent standoffs. But not today. Today it wasn't a symbol of family. It was a battleground. Janelle's voice broke the silence, measured, cold, and resolute. "You don't get to cry and play the victim while mocking the women who built this family." Robyn flinched. Meri spoke next. Her voice shook slightly, but it held. "You called me desperate. Thought I'd never find out. Say it now, to my face." Robyn stammered. The usual polished delivery was gone. What followed wasn't a fight. It was a reckoning. Janelle did not scream. She did not have to. Her composure was more slashing than any scream. She laid it all out there. The years of being pushed aside, the ungrateful sacrifices, the quiet grief gulped down in the sake of preserving harmony. Robyn tried to respond, but it was clear. She was not sorry. just cornered. And for the first time, nobody rushed to her defense. This was not reality television anymore. This was reality. Outside, the air was slightly chillier than expected. Meri clutched her shawl. Janelle released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. There were no apologies, no hugs, no practiced promises of healing. But something had shifted. A release, a reclamation. For the first time in decades, they weren't performing for Cody's attention. They weren't contorting themselves to fit into a family structure that was never built for them. They weren't playing roles anymore. They were telling truths. Inside, Robyn collapsed at the table, her tears falling now, not to manipulate, not to plead, but in shock. She was alone with her own words, words she thought no one else would hear, words that empowered her, now wrapped around her like chains. There was no comeback. Not this time. Cody had listened to it all, heard her ridicule the women he once treated as spiritual equals. And worse? He didn't defend her. Not this time. Not really. Not anymore. Miles away, Cody listened to the recording again. He didn't speak. No apologies. No rage. Just the gradual, bitter realization that the empire he'd built on emotional capital and strategically deployed silence had crumbled from the inside out. The women weren't just leaving him, they were leaving the narrative. They were rewriting the script. And he hadn't just lost a marriage or a television show. He'd lost the illusion of control. Janelle and Meri drove off without looking back. Their resilience had been veiled for years beneath courteous smiles and quiet sorrow. Now, in the ruins of betrayal, they stood taller, not because they were cured, but because they were finally honest. They weren't wives anymore. They were witnesses, survivors, and they weren't pleading for a seat at the table. They were overturning the table. The fallout did not erupt into flames. It arrived in silence, a kind of quiet neither woman had heard in years. For Robyn, it was the sound of her own breath, echoing out in a house that once buzzed with voices and movement. Her phone was dark. No producer calls, no group texts for birthdays or holidays, just silence. The loneliness had finally caught up. She stitched herself for years into the center of a family held together by borrowed emotion and practiced affection. But even the most elaborately crafted universe collapses when gravity vanishes. And Cody's silence, that was gravity. Gone. He hadn't left, not physically, but something had shifted. The pedestal beneath her had fractured. She remembered his words. My defense of you is done, not rejection. Something colder. Detachment. The man who had rewritten the family script just to please her couldn't even look her in the eye now. And that frightened her more than all the other wives put together. Meri returned home to her quiet B&B in Parawan, not triumphant, not even at peace, just different. She made herself a cup of tea and let it get cold. But this time she didn't wait for someone else to join her for a sip. She drank it alone. Janelle returned home to a different kind of silence. Not the bitter kind, the kind that comes from owning your choices and refusing to apologize for them. Her kids sent memes. She laughed audibly. It was simple, but it was enough. Online, the video kept circulating. Reddit, Instagram, YouTube. But for the women who lived it, virality wasn't the point. The power wasn't in what leaked. It was in what followed. They didn't just bring Robyn to light. They reclaimed their voices. Cody didn't just lose his grip. He finally understood what holding on had wrought, and somewhere in the silence that followed, he finally got it.